Now comes the panel discussion. I wonder if we have any questions from the audience, because I wanted to give you priority to ask any questions first. Did anyone send any tweets or questions? Jezabel, no?
We didn't receive anything from Twitter, so I think we could leave the room open for any question for the audience.
Yes, so if you have any questions, please just raise your hand. If not, then I will give you a couple of minutes still. I have some questions prepared so that you don't feel the pressure to ask something yet. Perhaps I could start with you, Stefano. From your presentation, it seemed that you need specific expertise even to raise the questions, to be able to raise the questions, what kind of licenses I would need to share my solution with each other. So in the morning we heard from Miguel that for example, in Spain, of course, the situation is the same in other member states, that you have a huge gap between the capabilities and capacities of different administrations. How do you see that this can be solved on a national level, regional level, to give the relevant advice to even local municipalities, or is it impossible?
Okay, well, it's a difficult question. I'm aware that there are several initiatives online that are attempting to provide some tools for public administrations or anybody that is willing to adopt an open source license to actually select the one that is most suitable for them. I cited one that is linked to GitHub, but is not the only one, of course, out there. As far as your organization is concerned, the way the Commission sought to bring some more effectiveness in the way we manage our intellectual property rights and in the way we actually provide support to Commission colleagues in regards to open source was by introducing a network of IP correspondents actually that can gather for this type of needs on an early stage. It's very important to actually plan in advance the type of open source strategy that you want to apply for your software, and that you have a list of components that your developers are planning to use, so that people like me can have a look before the software is actually put together, rather than having to do some forensics afterwards and then perhaps tell you that you're not going to be able to share it with anybody.
Thank you so much. Okay, next question to JACQUI. Rodolphe has mentioned, actually suggested, that we should move away in procurement from merely digitizing the processes and let's say making them more efficient. And if we do that, we can perhaps create new ways of procuring and creating value. And I know that you're also influential to the setting up and running of the JACQUI, which did exactly that. By changing the rules of thinking and the way the procurement was set up, it really changed the ecosystem of companies. Could you perhaps say some words around this?
The initial ambition was by a group of rebels, quite frankly, but it had the support of the Prime Minister, and that's always important. And it was, prior to launching G-Cloud 1, an idea that we had no evidence to suggest we could transform it and create this new ecosystem, but we had a target to hit. And so the target was 25% of government's IT spend to be put through that framework. And that focused everybody's attention. And obviously having support from the cabinet was key. But it actually had to change the mindset of all the people in the value chain. And that was the tricky one. So it took us from G-Cloud 1 to G-Cloud 6 to get the right procurement framework to do exactly what we set out to do. I haven't ever said that before. If you tweet it, you do. But the reality of it wasn't easy, and we had to be flexible and adaptable with every framework. So the one that's due to be awarded in May is for the first time a G-Cloud framework that understands the way buyers need to buy, because it's not really about the IT, it's about the problem that you solve. So the new framework will cancel all other frameworks because they've been overlapping until now, and it will put in place something that supports that buying need. And that's upset lots of people. But from my own company's point of view, we understand that this is a journey that we're on. And you can do it by degrees, but if you're going to transform at that level, you have to be A, patient, and B, brave. So G-Cloud 9 that's awarded in May is the next brave. So there's G1, G6, and G9. So that's something perhaps to look at from a procurement point of view. Understand that making a start to change something with a target is important, but understanding you've got to configure a journey.
It seems to, oh, we have a question from the audience. Could someone give a microphone to the gentleman there? Right. It seems to me that you must have been innovative, so probably you had a bit of resistance, which means that you were innovative enough. And the question
yes.
from the audience.
Yeah. Can you hear me? Yeah. So it's a bit of a tricky, because it's a very broad question, in the sense that we saw in the presentation about licenses that it's not easy to choose a license. And from the presentations, I get the feeling that in many cases at national level, this has been solved by regulation. Basically, someone decides that there is a law who says what should be used at a number of levels. Not specific for licenses, if you want, but on some standards, on some things that you want to reuse. Sometimes the solutions have been done through just regulation. And at international level, it's a bit more tricky, because then you have all the member states which have their own solutions, and when you try to get them together, it's almost impossible, because on top of that, you will have problems about how to maintain, how to support the software. And from my experience and from the presentation, I realized that even inside member states sometimes, some agencies will provide software in a way, and others are not ready to do the same thing. And I would be looking to find, let's say, solutions which don't involve decisions, but involve collaboration. So that's why the question is tricky, because it's actually very broad.
Would like to?
Well, I will oblige. No, I understand. This is, I wouldn't say legislation determining the licensing, as you also recognize, but certainly policies that may derive from this legislation may actually provide for a situation where you have to make a certain decision in terms of what license to apply. Think about the case, for example, when certain open source licenses actually come together with a license on any patent that you have that the software is using in order to operate. Other licenses don't have that. If your organization has a certain policy on how to license patents, you may not be willing to use these licenses. So there are certain limitations in terms of the choice that you can have in terms of licensing, but I would say that the work that we are doing in Europe in terms of choosing appropriate instruments for licensing, and the efforts that we went through in order to draft one that most public administration could use, and mentioning the UPL, I don't want to make any advertisement here, but I should. But certainly is a step towards, let's say, this possibility for, or let's say, a more homogeneous way of applying licenses to software. That said, as I said before, copyleft is not always the best choice, depending on the case. Not all software are the same. So what I was trying to convey in my presentation is that even though the UPL is a fantastic license, and we should all use that when the situation is appropriate, there are other forms of licensing that are out there that might be more suitable for the particular case. Do not neglect permissive licensing. The MIT license, it's not because it's been done in the US that we say, oh, we don't like that. It's actually a more of a suitable way of releasing certain type of software, and that will create less burdens, less limitations downstream in the distribution of your component together with a larger program, for example. So this is what I would like to everybody to consider. Thanks.
Thanks. Perhaps just to add that when we were first drafting the UPL, the first version of the UPL in 2009, and now comes the next version, hopefully in the next 1 or 2 weeks. I'm crossing my fingers. But so in any case, when we were drafting the first UPL, it was first meant to be for commission services, and then later we opened it up and realized it's useful for other administrations. And what we learned from some cases in member states is that public administrations, including Commission, they're risk averse, right? We don't want to do new things because we have our nice cushion jobs. That's not risky. The risk is to do something different. And we had cases in Germany, I think, that an administration wanted to release code under a license, and they had discussions with their legal department for more than 1 year because they wanted to use the GPL. And the legal department was not really happy about some of the, let's say, more American characteristics of the license at that time. So it took them 1 year or more to get the agreement. And once we had the UPL, actually it took the legal department 1 week because it said, okay, if it's good for the Commission, it's good for us. So do not underestimate the impact and the effect of having a national organization or an authority telling you that you can use these 5 licenses, no questions asked, and you're covered because our legal department really looked into it. It's really because we are risk averse as functionaries. It's a good help. We have more questions.
I'd just like to say one more thing, please. Resist the temptation of drafting a license of your own.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. We actually have a prize winner today. The first tweet sent around with a question. It's our moderator of this morning, Mr. Matthias Strummer. Matthias, could you please ask your question directly?
So the idea was that you ask the question. I just write it on the tweet.
You've been such a good job. The honor goes to you.
Okay, thank you. No, it is. It's the same speaker also to Stefano. I experience also the on Twitter it's easier. So what I want to ask, would the European Commission be able to publish a brochure just with simple information about open source, the pros and the cons, the different licenses, so that it's for agencies, it's an entry point also to get to know this whole system and to lower the entry barrier?
Will be certainly a very good initiative. I'll be willing to work on it. I don't know if this is currently in the plans of Digit, but
I appreciate I wasn't asked, but I just wanted to share something with you. So for the last few years, we've been working with an organization called OSGeo, which is like this voluntary, anarchic group of wonderful developers building geospatial software. And I think in part, the guidelines are helpful, it helps set the scene, but there's nothing better going and meeting these people and understanding how they work. Because if you're coming with requirements, it's actually still very important to discuss things and have a mutual understanding. And I think that's what's interesting as well with some of these communities, because it was also mentioned in the other session, it's also sometimes very difficult to get involved. And several times we've talked about community building as well, and I appreciate the comments from my colleagues, but it's also a good idea to try and join communities as well as build them. So I just wanted to share this too.
So Flying Binary were part of the core Apache project, and the most recent one was Apache Spark. And one of the things I would say about communities is it's important to understand the direction, and there is a roadmap. The core Apache projects have a roadmap, but it's important to understand where you are, what you're trying to do, and how that dovetails with it. But we do try and make offline meetings available in most of the European countries, where you can come along and meet us and we can share roadmaps and stuff. There's lots of stuff online, but there's no substitute for getting involved in one of the projects. Even if you're not going to commit anything for it, actually getting involved, perhaps getting involved in some of the testing and that sort of thing. But literally, my advice is just jump in and do, because it's a very welcoming community.
About whether we have any intention of any brochures or studies. There are already a number of studies around using licensing and procuring open source software that are available on JoinUp. We have an online license selection, let's say, tool that can help, ask the right questions and can lead you through it. And we also have on JoinUp an expert, a legal expert, that can help any public administration on licensing issues, up to a certain number of mandates, of course. But this is what we also propose to national authorities, to set up such supporting mechanisms, either in terms of written brochures or actual experts that can be contacted. And also with the release of the new EPL, I believe that we will also have an updated, let's say, guidance on how people can use it. Perhaps just to move on, because so that you don't feel a bit out and everyone gets a question. And Rodolphe, you showed us your plan with setting up the EU catalog for ICT procurement. Could you tell us something about how you will provide this catalog for public procurers? Is it going to be on a voluntary basis, or do you foresee that perhaps national governments will make it obligatory for administrations to look and go there first before procuring anything?
I think it's going to be voluntary, of course. I think it's no place for regulation. It's really trying to foster a community. I think we discussed that. I think I liked as well what Robin has said about joining communities. That's also really something we need to do, because there are different perspectives, different technologies, different roles, and we need to join the issues, the work on issues. So that is also why we're trying to catalog needs as well. I didn't have the time to mention it in the presentation, but actually it's the European Catalogue is also part of the EU e-government action plan, but it's also in the EIF, in the recommendations. And it's also in the sharing and reuse framework recommendation 5. Because we really think that this work on trying to find synergies is key. Is key to develop solutions which can be then shared and reused. That's the whole logic of it. Yeah.
And Cédric, you showed in your presentation that collaboration is in the blood of Swiss people. I think it's a challenge. You take it as an opportunity rather than a challenge to try to set up and work together with others. You mentioned in your presentation, mainly talked about your future plans and your current activities, but I'm aware that this e-government strategy has started, or e-government cooperation started already in 2008. Do you have anything on? Did you assess their impact, or probably it was very successful since it has been continued ever since?
I must say no.
No.
It was not really successful. Why? Because the first action plan was composed of 50 or more projects, and it was much too more, I must say. And as we, in 2015, this strategy saw new on the floor made, so we decided to set a little number of projects. And this is this 8 project now. And I will say these projects are really strategical for all the levels of the institutional levels, for the Swiss state, for the cantons, and for the communes. And you should have all the political and the experts of e-government in the boat to lead this kind of project.
I think it really resonates very well with what you said, JACQUI, that you need political support, you need support from your bosses, and you're very fortunate you have 4 bosses, so you have lots of support. And it also resonates with having clear targets. Perhaps in the beginning you had too many targets to reach, and as JACQUI said, if you can define a well-articulated target which is understandable for everyone, it makes things easier.
Can I just add one thing? That Perhaps it's not obvious, but I'm an entrepreneur, and having entrepreneurs in the mix, and actually sat as I was an independent ministerial advisor, so I cut through the system. I actually sat at the top and basically disagreed when I thought disagreement was right. And there was only 10 of us at the beginning who effectively pushed this thing very, very hard. But it was important to have innovators who, for their everyday, challenged, because the challenges that were set were challenges that were managed every day. So we might have had those targets, but as we developed it, we moved from G-Cloud 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. We continued to push. And an entrepreneurial mindset is a welcome thing. At the time, there were 250 companies in London, and that was the entire estate for the UK. We now have 1.3 million companies. So that's what you stand to gain as a national economy for doing something like share and reuse. That's a phenomenal growth in just 6 years. But that's actually what the DSM can be.
Thanks. And finally, Robin, just a question. The EULF also, the EULF and the ARENA projects, they've been going on for many years now. The ELIS is, I think, more than 1 year old. What was the most difficult element in your experience? Was it setting up the right governance? Was it engaging people? Was it ensuring enough uptake of the things that you produced? What were the things that were most problematic to overcome with, and how did you overcome, if you managed? Yeah.
So we have a formal evaluation, as Xabi knows, in the ISA program, and I was very happy to be one of the top 5 actions in terms of ARENA, and that's nice. And communication is really the key here, because there's a lot of trust that we get on and do the things the right way, but we're not always getting the feedback. And we've got a collaborative activity in Inspire from the very beginning, and we've been working very closely with the member states, but you can't constantly consult people. And I think the notion here of having formal processes, so if, for example, next week we start the ISA² working group for geospatial solutions, this is a really important and useful checkpoint to understand where we are. But in general terms, trying to evolve the activities, trying to fit with and understand what Digit's doing, because certainly on a personal level, this was all new for me 5 years ago, and now I hope I'm slightly more articulate in the context. So there's the opportunity to share. The sharing of experiences and the communication too. But I think in a number of cases of what we're talking about, it could be called customer interaction or whatever, but we should allow ourselves slightly to be shaped by some of these processes. And of course, user needs is a key concept that we want to try and develop under ICT. We want to be useful for citizens and businesses and other public administrations. But the forces that really shape that probably aren't very well understood. So as a social scientist and a researcher, it's some of the questions I'd like to try and explore as we go through ELISE. How can we better engage with certain communities? And just one example to share is particularly the activities we're interested in the economy and the digital single market is how can we understand where the public task stops and opportunities for business to create value added on top of geospatial data can really begin. Because what we do see, and it has some value still, is it's the public administrations that are starting to build the applications on top of their own data, which is great for learning experience, but then we're intervening a little bit in the market. So I think it's really trying to shape the spaces and understand what we are and who we are in new contexts. But that really brings great benefits as well, because as we go, at least into the ISA² program, we have a chance to be much closer related to also my other colleagues on the panel. And again, I'd like to thank Digit for the opportunity to develop our ideas under the ISA program and take it forward under ISA². So thanks for it.
Do we still have some time left?
We still have 5 minutes.
5 minutes. Okay. Any questions from the audience? No? Okay. Robin?
One more, just to follow on from mine, I just had a chance to think. The other key thing here, coming from the geospatial community, is terminology. Now, also as a scientist, I'm bound to say you've got to define terms, and I tried to define assets at the start of my presentation. But as I was working with Xabi and colleagues, I noticed that certain terms weren't well understood. So I take two, just so you understand the difficulties we have on a very basic level. One is metadata. So I mentioned it in my presentation. And metadata for us means a description of a data set and how you can go and find it. But metadata can mean many things in an ISA context. Also, of course, we have metadata in Join Up about the tools, and that was more or less comfortable. But there were times in certain meetings I thought we're not speaking the same language in the sense of English. And the other one's reference data. So reference data for us are these master maps. This is the road network. Here are the key data about buildings that you would attach other data to. Whereas reference data, sometimes from the ISA context, is the really useful data we have been called in code lists. So the point I'm trying to make here is, okay, there's the terminology, but what really comes is great opportunities as well, and that's why I really like this conference, is multidisciplinarity. So we have a lot of IT people here. I'm sort of a social scientist, but it'd be really nice to also get people involved, maybe for the arts and humanities. They're the people who invented Google. It was the librarians that invented the algorithms that Google processes. And they're maybe not here, maybe some of them are, the information scientists. But there are real opportunities in confronting yourself against people who understand less about what you know. And that was maybe part of the keynote that we heard at the very beginning of the day, that you should be challenging some of your ways of thinking. And for me, as I said before, you should be trying to go out into other communities and confront what you do against what their needs are, because you might find that you've actually got great opportunities that come from that. Thanks, Jamie.
Thank you very much. I think it also works the other way around. If you include in your teams people that are coming from a different domain, that can also bring a fresh point of view to your project, especially if you do it for too long. It can really help if you have a fresh look at things that you take for granted. Perhaps I will just wrap up what we learned here. I took some notes, and it was quite interesting. So some keywords: have a clear target. Too many is not too good. Don't be afraid of not getting it right the first time. So go ahead and iterate. Have support from above. The more bosses you have, the better, right? And that was also a very interesting point, and I think it's also relevant for our colleagues in GROW, is to know, or at least to ask the question where you should stop and where you should, and how you should encourage the market to take over, and not to try to do everything yourself in the public sector. That was also an interesting point. So unless there are any more questions, I would like to thank you for your active participation, and also for the speakers, and also for your patience, and definitely for our gentleman who asked the question on Twitter. So thank you very much all, and see you soon. Bye.